Hello, listeners. I'm Pat Healy, and this is Music is My Life, a podcast from Berklee Online. And in this episode, you're going to take note of Andrew Joslyn. He began making a name for himself in the aughts with his band Handful of Luvin, and his musical career hit its stride not too long after quitting that band and beginning to help Seattle area musicians score their music. His big break came when he scored some of the biggest hits of Macklemore and Ryan Lewis, but he didn't make as much money as he probably deserved. However, he learned a huge life lesson from the experience and then started taking classes with Berklee Online, #humblebrag, to figure out how to remedy unfair financial arrangements. And then he continued to score for artists such as Kesha, and then again Macklemore. But this time he knew how to get a percentage of the royalties he deserved. Oh, and I should also mention that his brother is comedian Chris Kattan, who he talks a bit about in the next 40 minutes. But long before Handful of Luvin and Same Love, Andrew Joslyn had an impactful introduction to music. I'll let him tell you about it.
So my parents got me started playing classical violin when I was 5 years old. My family had a pretty heavy classical pedigree. My grandfather started the London String Quartet with William Primrose, and my grandmother was a famous cellist that played with the MGM Studio Orchestras. They were under Rosinski. My great aunt was also an amazing violinist. Like, she was actually the best musician in the family. You know, she one day played the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto, and then in the second half of the program sat down and did the piano, the Mendelssohn Piano Concerto. So it's like there was this very, very heavy, like, classical, very technical, very, like, esteemed group of musicians on my dad's side. It was a very, very, very daunting shadow to live under. And my parents had no illusions of grandeur that I was going to be an amazing musician. You know, it was something they were like, hey, we just want, we want to give you a good education. All the pressure, though, came from the community. With classical music, it's like, okay, what's the conservatory you're going to? What are you working on? And I think the culture and the stress of it was really hard for me to handle. So it was a pretty long time before I actually really started enjoying music, which sounds really weird to say, but it was, it always felt like I didn't take to performing immediately. It wasn't something that felt natural. It's like, especially in a classical atmosphere, everything's pretty stuffy. It's not a give and take with the audience. It's very like, here you are in your fishbowl and everyone's just glaring at you and making sure you don't fuck up. But it's interesting because it's like, by the time I got through high school, I think, I did a couple of like orchestra camps. I went over to this thing called Kinhaven in Vermont, and the experience of being with so many other like really, really talented musicians was amazing. Around that time, I started realizing that, like, for me to compete on a national level, I just had to be like so much better. Like, I had to work so much harder, and it's like I started really practicing and really, really going for it. And I think by the time I got to college, it just kind of seemed like the one thing I'd been doing consistently my entire life, music, that I was just like, well, I might as well just continue that career path. I don't know what it's going to amount to, though, because at that time I was just like, I'd known my grandparents as being career musicians. They weren't around at all by the time I was making these decisions. So I didn't really have a soundboard that kind of be like, well, what's it like to be a full-time musician? What's it like to try and have this career? What's it like, what's the work-life balance? Like,
Did you have any sort of exchange with them musically, or?
I had a very, very, like my grandmother, the only exchange and real memory I have with my grandma with music is, she got so much joy from playing the cello, but there was a certain point where my brother had a recording of her while she was practicing one day, and she listened back to the recording just, on a whim, and was so disgusted with how she sounded. And she's just like, nope, I'm done. I'm turning it in. I'm not playing anymore.
Oh, man.
Her level of self-critique was so intense that she couldn't let people hear, or she couldn't stand hearing how much she had changed in tone. And you know what I mean? That's always been kind of this, like, I don't understand that. It's like, it's not a love of the music. It's just a love of the technique.
Right. And you probably didn't even hear anything wrong with it.
No, God, no. Yeah, exactly. I was like, that sounded beautiful. And it's like, so that was a really weird experience. And
is that your brother, Chris?
Yeah. My brother, Chris, he went into acting, and he made a huge thing as a kid where he would make radio programs. He would just walk around the house with a tape recorder and record everybody. It was par for the course for him to, like, record my grandma playing. So
now, were you as critical of yourself as your grandmother was of herself during this period, or did that shock you to your core? And
no, it didn't. It seemed par for the course at the time. I was like, I mean, I was shocked and disappointed, but I was also like, oh, I can get it. Like, yeah, like I have to really, really work on my tone and bow control, and I still am working on the vinyasa and blah, blah. You know, it's like my mindset was, I could understand it, you know. I mean, I think the main thing is, it's like I really, really, really wanted to love music more than I did, but I just didn't find the natural relationship with it that made sense. And I had, like, you know, violin performing. I, like, had little stints here and there where I did like fiddle music. Like, I learned some Swedish fiddle music, some Celtic Irish stuff, and that actually I started taking to a lot more, just because of the atmosphere was so much different. And I also, everything I learned by playing by ear. There was no sheet music at all. So it was that was like a really interesting education. It's like a totally different thing. So by the time I got to college, I saw what was required of me to really, really excel on the national level. Like, I would have to be practicing 11 hours a day and have no life. I'd have to be so dedicated to the craft to catch up and be able to, like, if I wanted to, you know, go to Juilliard, or if I wanted to do this or blah, blah, you know, it's like, at a certain point it became so daunting, and I started loathing the culture so much, just because there's a highbrowness and an elitism to it all that I couldn't stand. That I dropped my music performance major to a minor, and by sheer coincidence, like, I met a guitarist in college that was starting a rock band, and I was like, I'm going to try this. This will be fun. Let's try this. But I was so classical, like, I didn't know, like, I was like, do you have any sheet music? And he's like, what? So joining the rock band, I think, was really the first thing that was, like, crazy for me. 'Cause it's, you know, I played the first show. I had an electric violin. I had pedals. I didn't know anything I was doing. Played for a drunk audience of about, like, you know, 20 people at a bar. And it was so visceral, so immediate. I was improvising. So it's like, the thing is, it's like you're composing on the spot. So it was just one of those things where it's like, okay, I found my clan, I found my calling, and I found a new relationship with music that made sense.
Did it take a lot of self-restraint on your part to be more forgiving of yourself, you know, playing improvised things and not getting so upset?
Yeah. Well, I think that was the beauty of playing in a band like that, and just the nature of learning to improvise. Yeah, I mean, you're falling off the horse every minute. Like, you know, I'm rocking out in the key of A minor. Oh no, I played like an E flat. Oh shit. Oh wait, it's okay, it's fine. And yeah, that's the thing, is it's like so immediate, and it's like, you mess up, well, okay, just keep it going. Just you have an audience, people are watching, and it's like, you learn to be so forgiving, but also so you're critical, but you're forgiving, but you also just learn to let things go. It's almost like a stream of consciousness. Like, also during that time, do you know the book The Artist's Way?
Oh,
Have you
yeah.
heard that book?
That's great.
Okay. So that whole idea of stream of consciousness where you just do the morning journaling,
Yep.
and that idea of just letting you get the ego out of the way and just let the music just flow through you without self-critique as best as possible. It all went hand in hand with being in a rock band. And it was interesting because it's like I literally had to unlearn all this stuff that I cherished so much, and I was pushing so hard, and I wanted to be the perfect violinist, and I just gave up on that dream and was like, I just want to be, I just really want to have a fun time and actually enjoy the music that I'm doing.
Well, so what did it take to unlearn that stuff? I mean, I know, and I can totally see the artist's way working in concert with a new attitude, but how did you at band practice, when you showed up with your violin, just learn to forgive yourself and learn to take new adventures and risks?
It just over and over and over again. I mean, obviously during that time, and still do, like, you still have self-auditing and self-doubt and wondering if you're good enough, or like, and at a certain point when you're performing, you stop worrying if you're good enough and you just perform. You just give over to the art, and because that's all that exists in that moment. So I think I just learned to be forgiving, and I had a new kind of I had a new drive to practice, but for a very different reason. It forced me to. The thing that was beautiful with improvising is I actually learned how to be a musician, like real musician, where I could like write my own stuff. Because I'd be like, okay, I know this band is playing in this, and I think we're like, I started learning how to create lead sheets and get the lay of the land of what the chords are and what's happening, but understand, like, okay, this note, even though it's not in this chord, it sounds okay. Why is that? Oh, that's a seventh. It's like I kind of, this is all obvious and very, very very common sense stuff for basic musicians, but it was one of those things where it was so exciting for me to learn it and see the natural application in a way where I was like, it wasn't just like, here, let's sit and do chord identification or exercises. Like I was actually experiencing it firsthand and hearing it in practice with a band. So the great thing is, it's like we had a good level of success for an indie alt rock band. We tried to take it as seriously as we could. We went to music conferences. We from the business side at that point, I had no knowledge of anything in the industry. Like, I was just like, okay, I know we want to get from point A to point B and play a show, and we want to have people there. But I didn't know anything about marketing. I didn't know anything about business management or self-promotion. It just, none of it made any sense, because for my entire life, I'd just been focusing on the craft and actually not sucking when I played live.
What are your feelings, hindsight, about the name of the band?
Oh, I was always a huge hater. I learned to live with it over time, but like the group was in existence for 9 to close to 10 years, very much towards like the latter half. I was just like, God, I can't stand this name.
So the band, runs its course, and then by that point, though, you had been doing it professionally, right? You were on an indie label, and
as close to professional as possible. And what I started seeing was that we would tour relentlessly. We'd play all these shows. A lot of the money would go back into keeping the business alive. So like paying for hotels, paying for the van, paying for this. So, and we, during that time, me and the guitarist were pretty much kind of coordinating and running the group. So I was learning in the moment how to negotiate guarantees, ticket pricing. No, let's not let the venue take a percentage of merchandise. So let's instead, it's like all of a sudden you start learning to run the numbers and actually make sure you come out on top. And it's, instead of it being a fun hobby, I started seeing it being like, I really have to survive. Like, we really need to figure out how to do this. And in tandem with doing everything with with this band, like I had to, you know, it's like you have to get a day job, like, or like some kind of like side job. So I could at least make rent, you know?
Right.
So
what was your side hustle?
Well, I actually like worked at a temp agency for a while that placed me in a bunch of rando jobs all over Seattle. And it was like the last placement that I got that actually got me like a full-time job was Getty Images.
Oh yeah.
But I was doing copyright for them, like fun. Copyright compliance. And I was representing artists. So it was it's kind of funny because the side hustle in the full-time business world actually is what led me to Berklee and that whole mindset, because it was like learning all about copyright law because for doing copyright compliance, I had to learn copyright law as applied to, you know, the US, to Canada, to the UK, Australia, Germany, like, because I'd have to help collect, you know, infringement claims all over the world. So seeing the kind of business side of the art all of a sudden made me really desperate to be like, you know what, like I really wanted to, there was a part of working at a day job that I liked, you know, the safety, the 9-to-5 security and benefits and blah, blah, blah. Like, I mean, there's a part of me that's always been a creature of comfort. Mm-hmm. So I was like, well, you know, I would really love to see if I could work. Like, it just seemed like very clear to me. I would love to see if I could work in the music industry. I don't know what that looks like. I have no idea. You know, there's Sub Pop and Barzook and some other labels in Seattle, but maybe I could try and work for them, or like, I don't like, you know, that was the mindset. And also during that time, it's like, well, maybe I can learn how to start being a tour manager, or I can be, you know, start doing stuff with, you know, what, like, whatever position I could make sense of, you know, getting into the industry. And that's when I first learned about Berklee, and it was just like, okay, I really, really I need to learn. So I started taking music business classes online, and that like really helped me solidify the fact that like I really wanted to do music full time. I was starting to build up tools to do it full time in my head, you know, with the numbers and everything else. But it also really started in informing me that like the band, the Handful, wasn't the key to me having a sustainability. Mm-hmm. Just because it's like when you're in a band like that, and there's you know, you have 3 other mouths to feed, plus, you know, so much overhead. It was one of those things where it's like, I need to figure out my own kind of solo kind of hustle that I can work on, that actually like maybe eventually buy me a house and everything else. So I started working in Berklee, or started doing Berklee courses and stuff.
Yeah.
And
what year was that?
That was 2010, okay. Actually 2010, 2011, because I got everything. I graduated like 2012 to 2014, like with different certificate programs. Right. Around that time, I started just being a hardcore session musician in Seattle. Like, I would take any gig with any band, and because of the success of Handful, I just met so many bands, and they're like, "Oh, hey man, do you want to play on a record? We just need like a violin solo or blah blah blah." And I just started walking into the studio, and I'd started learning viola and cello at that time too, and picking mm-hmm. them up. So I started taking on this mantle as kind of like a one-man orchestra, where I would just multi-layer myself. And I knew, because I had all the classical training, I knew all the theory, and I could do arrangement and, you know, create kind of on the fly these string arrangements for pop and rock tunes and everything else. But then I had the skill set, and, you know, if need be, I could just improvise in studio, right. You know, and people loved that. So that was another side hustle that I was starting. And around that time is when I met Macklemore, or Ben Haggerty, before and it was like he had been in rehab and had just gotten out and was living in his parents' basement. Mm-hmm. So it was a really, like, I had no idea like he was gonna, it's like I had no idea he was gonna have the success he would have in like later years. So to me, it was just like another artist that I just was really enthusiastic about working with,
Mm-hmm.
So like I just started playing with him, and like the very first hip hop show like I ever went to, it's like Macklemore's opening up for Blues Scholars and Common Market, and all these like major hip hop heads that are a part of the Seattle scene were at this place, and it's at Numos and on Capitol Hill, and it was just really funny because it's like I mean, you heard the story so far. It's like I'm the super classical, folky fiddle playing kid with long hair at a hip hop concert, and it's like just the weirdest thing, and it was just like, all right. And I mean, that was just a totally different world to me. So it's like during that time, like, it's just all these weird, I always love to think of it as my like Hamburg stage.
Yeah.
I was just playing everywhere. I was playing everything. I was playing hip hop. I was just, the stuff with Handful was dying down, which was, like the rock Celtic-y kind of stuff. I did a heavy metal record with a band. It's like I even started doing Christian albums with people, like everything and anything that I can do to just learn as much about the industry and play with musicians. So yeah, it's funny because right then I think is like the first time all the major building blocks for the career that I have now were really started. Once I'd kind of pretty much completed stuff with Berklee, I immediately applied for kind of like a job ad in a Craigslist for a new label that was starting in Seattle. And I joined up with them and became like an A&R manager and worked there for about 3.5 years. And
what label was that?
It's called Votive, VOTIV.
Okay.
They were doing management, publishing, licensing. They were a traditional record label. We did so much work helping artists from like Australia and like international artists break into the US market. So it was so informative. It was really cool because it like that and just I mean it like also I was just like writing a ton like for bands. Like I was doing orchestral arranging, and the Macklemore stuff was just starting to take off. I think it was like 2012 like was the pivotal year because that was when The Heist was released.
Yeah.
Like I think it was like October of 2012. Everything dropped. I had a record with a pretty big local artist named Chris Orlowski. We did a joint like orchestral folk record that started doing really well in licensing. It got picked up for Grey's Anatomy and some other TV shows. And then I had another record, and then The Heist dropped, and it was like that kind of really started everything in that. Because like now, like the work that I do shit ton of film scoring, but also like orchestral production for bands. So just like any, if a band they need a woodwind section or like full strings or something, like I'll write it, orchestrate it. And, recently, like I've started working with symphonies. Like I did a whole, it's just fun because it's like everything's completely coming full circle.
Right.
I was the orchestra kid that wanted to be in the rock world. And now it's like I'm on the other side, bringing the classical world to the rock world.
Right.
Like Macklemore just had a whole symphony concert with Seattle Symphony, and I was the guy that did all the charts. And Blind Pilot, a band out of Portland, I did a show with them in March, and they had a whole show with Oregon Symphony. It's just like fast forwarding, just like everything that I'd set up over the past couple of years kind of led me to where I am now.
So am I mistaken in the part of the anecdote that I relayed that you did maybe do more than you were compensated for on some of those early works?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think not just the Macklemore stuff, but like across the board, I was so eager and so enthusiastic to just play on people's stuff. There were certain gigs I would just show up, they'd pay me $20 and a beer, and I'd be like, yeah, totally, man. That's great. I'm totally in. Like there was so much pro bono stuff, and and for a while that's fine. It's funny because now, like, I'm always worried about rates and being very like in advocating for artists having set rates, because so much of a lot of people will take advantage of artists that are so enthusiastic. I don't know. There's a certain mentality of just like, you just need to be super scrappy
Right.
to be a musician. And a part of that is not getting hung up about the money sometimes, you know? And it's weird because I still have that scrapper attitude, but like I run my own string quartet and do contracting for them. And they're all very, very much of the classical mindset of, I need to be compensated for my time. Every 50 minutes, I need to have a 10-minute break. It's a very diva union minded attitude. And it's like, it's good, but it also like, when you bring a bunch of string players into a rock session, it can irk people because it's a totally different mentality. They're both musicians, but it's totally different mindsets. And it's just fun because I feel like I can understand both sides now.
Right.
I mean, one of the hardest things for me was being the scrapper, but then all of a sudden realizing like, oh my God, like I'm going to get married. I want to have kids. Like I want to have a mortgage. Like I want to be able to have a sustainable life. And unfortunately, you have to charge for the work. You have to charge for your time. You have to sometimes take gigs that are not that great, but they pay well.
Right.
It's like the balance between the creative and the commercial. I really needed to learn, and I'm still learning. But it was, yeah. I do think that scrapper attitude though was really, really important, and I can't fault it because that attitude and that enthusiasm is what got me to where I am today. It's funny because it's like to speak to like Macklemore, or there was a bunch of records that I was a part of that I was just like, I didn't know how to ask for what I was worth at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like I put in hours and hours and hours and so much writing. And when the Macklemore stuff first initially came out, it was like, those ships sailed and I was left at the dock, and it's like, oh, wait a minute. I helped launch your career. Where am I? What happened?
But you're friendly with those guys and you've worked with them since.
Absolutely.
So I'm guessing you had some sort of coming to terms with that, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And things have been rectified and a lot of stuff has changed and improved. Like things have been fixed on that end. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because it's like when you have an artist and everyone, like whenever I teach songwriting or like music business classes, like it's one of the first things I really encourage people to have is the real gut wrenching, honest talk. Like go down to brass tacks of just being like, okay, we're going to sit down and write a song together. Who gets what? It's going to be an uncomfortable conversation, but like, let's just be honest with each other, or at least agree that this is all going to be like split evenly or not. Or, if one person brought the song to the table, make sure to give them the lion's share, like, because I'd been in so many situations since with other bands, and some I can't even say because it's like NDA agreement stuff, that it's just like, just get the information out and then have fun. And,
I imagine orchestration is difficult too, because you're adding notes that weren't there before.
Right.
And so it is.
And sometimes it's super thematic, really big. Like, yeah, sometimes it's like, that's the heaviest riff and it's almost becoming borderline top line.
Right.
And there's been certain records that I did a ton of work on and I should have been given songwriter percentage and I wasn't. And there's other records where I didn't do a lot and they still gave me songwriting.
Right.
And I like, it's like, in the end, it's like, sometimes strings get delegated to be the Patty section, which I hate, it's like, but sometimes it's just what works, and it's, there was a song where it was just like, I just gave pads and I got songwriting. I'm like, I don't even feel like that's fair. Like,
Yeah.
I love that. Thanks for giving me credit, but like, I don't think I deserve it.
Well, let's talk about one of the more popular ones. Obviously, is "Praying" by Kesha.
Yep.
What was the process like there?
So I came in on that as a production kind of what is it? Like I was producing along with Ryan Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
So he originally Kesha sent her kind of like top line, her audio, just recording of her singing the song, and Ryan like called me in and we started working on it together, and he's like, well, I don't even know what key this is in, or he's like, I have like he had like an old beat of his that he had for an old artist named, oh God, like some artist that he had worked with from '08 that he was like trying to fit it in. And so it was interesting. So I helped sit down and really flesh out an idea of how directionally and like chord wise and everything else, like we sat down and really worked on that together. And then he workshopped it for a while, came back after like working with Ben and with Kesha, and we had kind of like a rough form. And then that's when I came in and did like the heavy lifting, like string arranging and like figuring out some horn lines and like, just like all the additional melody stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So in that situation, I worked for the percentage for sure.
Right. It's interesting though, because, had you not taken that first gig with Macklemore and Ryan Lewis, like he might not have known your name, might not have like called you up for that.
Exactly. And I don't know. I've kind of, it's interesting because it's with this career, there's times when you just money's not coming in, the gigs aren't there, and it's dried up, and it's really scary. But like, I don't know. I always have faith that things work out the way that they should, and you just don't know where that opportunity is going to come from.
Mm-hmm.
So that mindset, I always try really hard not to burn bridges, just because it's like I always want to make sure, like, I don't know. I look at it as customer service. Like I go into a gig, I want to be a great hang. I want people to have a great experience, because who knows, maybe down the line there's going to be another Kesha track or, a Rihanna track, which randomly gets pitched to me through, random channels.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, a great example is I had worked with a producer in Portland, and I worked on his record. He loved the experience so much. We had a great rapport. I got pulled in to do an episode of Bob's Burgers a couple of months later.
That is great.
Like, and I had no idea that was going to happen. I didn't know that was going to be there, but it was like okay. Yeah. Let's, we're in the big leagues now. All right, cool.
It's like that, that Jimmy Iovine story where he gets called in to work on Easter Sunday when he's just like an assistant engineer, and he goes,
right,
and then it's John Lennon he's working with, and it's like, oh
yeah. And it's weird to say, but those stories are real. And it happened, like, and I'm as scrap or blue collar as can get when it comes to music, but like it happens. It, like, if you've been in the industry long enough, it happens to you.
Mm-hmm. Now, what's your day to day like? I mean, you're still involved in a million projects, but what takes the precedence?
So now so I have two main kind of recording studios. I got one down in Pioneer Square in Seattle, and my wife and I just, the dream of owning a house, we just purchased a property down in Des Moines, south of Seattle. And so I have a home studio, and my day-to-day right now, the major stuff I'm working on is film scores. I've already done 2 film scores this year, and I'm just wrapping up a second one. So the major kind of like albatross projects that I have are the film scores. And like, it's like once every 3 months I'll have a big film score that I'm working on that kind of carries me. It's kind of like it's like a normal kind of regular day-to-day grind.
Mm-hmm.
Every week I'm working on a really popular podcast called Case File.
Oh, okay.
Which I'm one of the main composers on the show, and I'm as of right now, I'm just cranking out tons of content. So, which is both a blessing and a curse. So it's like some episodes for Case File are like, 60 minutes to 120 minutes in length.
Yeah.
So, there's underscore the entire time.
Yeah.
So,
how do you do underscore? What's your approach to it? I mean, are you following the cadences of the person's speech, or what the content is? What informs your direction the most?
So when I get for Case File, they'll send me a script and they'll send me an audio recording that's been edited. I'll read through the script and kind of mark spots where I'm like, okay, this is suspenseful. This is just background. This is fluffer. Like I'll identify spots where he's just like, okay, he's just talking about the family of the victim, or there's no risks to it. Mm-hmm. So I really try and identify the really risky emotional spots that really need to be highlighted. But I also learn to identify the spots where there's like, nothing's going on here. It's okay to kind of skate by.
Yep.
I don't need to go nuts here and create some crazy symphonic attack, you know? And it's the same way I'll do with film scoring too. Like I'll really try not forecast too much. Like, okay, something's about to happen, because sometimes that it gives away it's funny because it's film. It's more, there's extra dimensions to work on because you can read the facial language of, an actor. But when it's just a podcast, you're just going off of, like you said, their cadence, and, you're trying to anticipate, are we listening from the perspective of the narrator or what's being said, or from the perspective of the audience that's listening?
That's good.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, are we anticipating stuff because of the actor or anticipating stuff because of the audience? That's how I do it. And then everything else is like, I'll set up gazillions of microphones, record myself playing piano, violin, viola, cello, or if I'm feeling really bored, I'll jump into Omnisphere and just fuck around with like weird synth stuff, and, just send it through a bunch of different EQ settings and compression and just,
Are you a rarity in the industry though? I mean, I imagine MIDI, a lot of people do MIDI, right?
Yeah.
But that's awesome that you don't.
I broke down recently and I bought like Spitfire, the Bernard Herrmann toolkit, which is like, it's a really good sample library. And, for better or for worse, I'm a dinosaur in the industry where I really, truly, fully believe in the power of the real performance.
That's great.
Here's the other reality of this, the industry right now is a lot of people just don't have the budget to do live instruments at all. And, I am so thankful to my parents so many years ago starting me out on the violin, because most, I would say like 80% of an orchestra is strings.
Right.
So that nearly kills me every time, because to get a big orchestral sound, I literally own 2 violas, actually 3 violas, 4 violins. I have a baritone viola. I have a cello. To get the different timbres and feels, and I have a bunch of different, I have a Coles ribbon, I have a Neumann, I have Royer. I have all these different microphones for different, so every iteration, and because I'm all I am is multi-tracking, but in the end, it's like, I try and make it sound as much like a studio orchestra as humanely possible,
Right. You're pretending to be different people almost.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'd go the length of okay, here's first chair. Here's where the microphone is. I'll move over to second chair, quote unquote. And then, if I need to if I'm sitting behind the first chair, I'll put a little pre-delay on the, or I'll nudge back the recording just 10 milliseconds or whatever it takes for the sound from the instrument to get to the audience's ear,
Right.
you know, like really crazy, you know, micro little things like that. But in the end, it's like, oh, whoa, it sounds pretty close to an orchestra.
Right.
It's a step up
Right.
from it. But the bottom line is, the one thing that I can do is I can compete with synthestrators because hands down my stuff sounds better.
Yeah.
Because it's real. That's the bottom line. And it's fun now because I actually have a production team. I've gotten to a point where I can actually like have a crew of people to like make my stuff sound even better. Does it take a hell of a lot longer and a lot more stress on me? And, you know, yeah, for sure. So I don't know. I really, really want to battle that feeling that we're going the way of fake instruments, you know, and everyone's working in the box. And it's the same mentality in pop music where, you know, DJs are king right now. Mm-hmm. It's so easy to put on a show. Everything's in one USB stick, but also touring can be relatively easy. You just get on a plane and fly out, show up, and you're ready to go, you know, as opposed to bringing, you know, there's certain artists, there's certain groups that they see the importance of live instrumentation and will do something about it. Like Odessa is a great example. They bring a live band with them everywhere, and I love them for it.
Right.
There's plenty of DJs, and you know that's not the case at all.
Right.
You know, right. I don't know. So yeah, I don't like fake instruments.
Yeah.
But I'm also not such a dinosaur that I don't see the value that they bring to the table and shy away from it.
Right. Right. One thing I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about, you know, when you talk about scoring movies and stuff, how in your life have you collaborated with your brother? You know, he's on an artistic track.
Yeah. Oh God,
one.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting because a whole different side story with my brother. I always kind of, when I got to high school, or actually middle school, because my brother got huge when I was in 8th grade, mm-hmm. and he's 12 years older than me. So it was I always kind of lived underneath his shadow for a really long time. And I wasn't upset about it or anything, but it was like, you're Chris Kattan's little brother. That's cool. What's that like? Yeah. Can I get his autograph? And it was really weird. Part of me wanted to, I cherished and adore my brother, but I didn't ever want to seem like I was just, my success was tied to him. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And there's been so many situations where, I mean, there's been times where he hangs out with the Red Hot Chili Peppers, or he's like, he'll go to a toga party with Drew Barrymore. And it's like I'll hear these stories from him and everything else. And it's like, but I can't say never, because there's definitely been times that I'll try and use his network mm-hmm. for help. But like, there hasn't been anything super huge that I've gotten through my networking with him where it's like, oh yeah, you know, we've always talked about, like, because he's always pitching TV shows, you know, ideas, and he's always tried to see if there's a remote spot for me to kind of come in, mm-hmm. but nothing ever clicked, and we've never kind of forced anything. And I think the first time we honestly really collaborated together for the first time artistically is when I put out my own record. Me and this video director I was working with, Garrett Gibbons, we had this idea, because it was the one of the lead singles for my record that I released last year was Plastic Heaven. Right. And it was just about kind of like the real dark side of social media and this celebrity obsessed kind of world. And I just thought it would be so freaking perfect to have my brother in it. So, and my brother was so giving with his time and talent. And it was really fun. And it was super weird for me too, because I was like, hey bro, do you want to just come and be videotaped for my thing? You know, and like every other kind of iteration of him showing up anywhere, it'd have to go through his booking agent, his talent agent, there'd have to be contracts drafted up. So I was definitely aware that I was getting like the behind the behind the door kind of like super homie hookup. It was fun because I had him dance in the desert to a remix of one of my songs.
Let's talk briefly about that song. And, one of the lines in it is like, what is it, like this business will break you or something? What is
there's that's actually another tune. There's a song that is actually about Chris, but it's also in part about Macklemore, and it's in part about kind of the celebrity overnight success stories, and that's the song Icarus, and it's almost a little too on the nose now, but it's it just talks about this obsession with Hollywood and this obsession with celebrity culture and how dangerous it can be.
Mm-hmm.
And just, I mean, there was a time when, I don't know, the thing that's hard, and it's a harder story for me to tell, because it's like, everyone knew me as Chris, or everyone knows me as Chris, or knew me as Chris Kattan's brother. And I, I really, a part of me didn't want people to know it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just wanted me on my own account. And when there was a time, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a while ago, my brother, he got married, had one of the top 10 shortest Hollywood marriages ever, lasted 3 months.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah. And he and everyone of my friends knew it because they knew I was his brother. So they're all like, oh man, like, everyone's finding out stuff about my brother and his personal life before I was, because they were on TV.
Oh man.
And like being like, oh man, did you see this coverage of your brother? And he was just hanging out with, it started getting really, there was a real fine line of like, I see him as a human being. He's my brother. Like, I love him. And like,
mm-hmm.
hear people start talking about my brother in those sort of terms was really disgusting and disturbing for me. And I didn't know how to like, be like, yes, he's an entertainer and he puts himself out there, but like, there needs to be a level of privacy.
Right.
And I saw that with Macklemore too, like, especially being with him from like the release of Heist all the way through like now. Him and his wife and his family have gone through so much hardship to like, the level of learning to keep your private life really private and not public domain. But like, there was a story, my brother like was caught on video getting into a car crash, and he like stumbled out of his car, and it looked like he was super drugged out, and the media was all over it, and it became this huge thing. I all of a sudden had people reaching out to me and being like, hey man, I would love to be a sponsor for your brother for rehab. Like, I would love to be like, like, and weird people started like that. I had no idea who they were. They were just, like, it at that point was like, okay, I got to write about this. I don't know how to, but I need to manifest this somehow. So that's kind of how Icarus came about. And actually, in conjunction, Plastic Heaven was kind of like a part of that same mindset, because it's like the other side of it too is it's like I played the Grammys, we did Same Love with Macklemore, and it was like,
mm-hmm.
had what is like 50 couples come out and all get married by like Queen Latifah all at the same time. And it's like, at a certain point, I just have to laugh because it's so bizarre to talk about, and it's so weird that did happen. That was weird, but it was like people just get so wrapped up, so like excited, and it's just so obsessed and so like overblown and dramatized, and human beings are weird creatures, man. Like, like all I can say, and this is, I mean, now since you've kind of gotten an earful, like I still feel like I'm the weird little awkward violinist kid, like looking in through all this. So it's like, being in the middle of that bizarre world and everything, it's like, I felt like I really did need to kind of give some lens to it all. So
yeah.
that's a good part of the, that first record of mine was really trying to talk about how crazy the world has really gotten.
Yeah.
Writing that record and releasing it and having it released last year was that was, I think, the first time I really, really had skin in the game. And
yeah,
because, it's like a lot of artists, it's like, you write your own music and you're putting yourself out there every day. And as a professional musician, you're just, you show up, you play and you leave, and you're emotionally, you're not really that tied to the ups and downs of the track once it reaches the public,
Right.
But actually releasing my own record with my own lyrics, with my own music, everything, it was so terrifying, but so empowering. It's like, okay, I can do that again. I'm not scared of that. And now everyone else, and now I feel like I actually can really go to people and be like, yeah, let's co-write a song together. I know what I'm doing. Like, and I actually have a proof of concept. The weird thing with the music industry is it always kind of feels like this weird, exalted kind of arena, but there's no like clear career path at all. It's like, if you want to get into medical school, go to pre-med. And then once you do that, then you do this, and you're working at a clinic, and then you're working underneath someone. And then, it's like, there's clear, very, very laid out socially. There's a clear path to follow. For music, not at all. It's like, are you going to be a mixer? Well, are you going to be a musician? Are you putting out your own product? Are you not putting out your own product? Are you a studio musician? And in the end, it's like, most people are so scared anyway. They're so protective of their own success that they're not really, they don't want to give away too much of their own trade secrets to, help someone else into the career. And I felt like Berklee was the first time I was like, oh my God, the trade secrets. Or I felt like it wasn't as daunting and scary as it was when I first started in the industry. I love Berklee. I just like, I love everything that you guys are doing. So
Andrew, Joslyn, Berklee Online says you're welcome. And thank you also for such positive remarks. Additional thanks to Mike Moyes for introducing me to Andrew, to Gabriel Reifer Cohen for mastering this episode, and to Andrew Walls for editing assistance. And thank you for listening. Be sure to stay tuned to online.berklee.edu/take-note for the latest on our crowdfunding podcast, coming next month, finally. Talk to you then.